Hello and welcome to our next review. Let's find out what it is.
That's in the title.
Okay. Here we are looking for the wizard in the bottle so that you don't have to. Well, certainly not in that one. I guess we really have to do this. Luke, what did you find out?
The adventure starts with a very short introduction telling you that not every loose end is tied up in the following text, nor every possible reaction accounted for. Be ready to improvise and do so with confidence. Other words for don't mind my plot holes. Then the adventure begins, and as all great adventures, it starts in a coffee shop. It starts in a coffee shop with everyone's favorite, massive amounts of front-loaded exposition for the party by the would-be employer with very little ability for additional information. The employer's personality shines through the given dialogue quite well, which is good because he doesn't have any stated personality otherwise.
So, the story Ulfgar tells you is about old comrades that had a great time together even though adventuring took its toll. Ulfgar himself is missing a leg and Amelia herself continued adventuring with a new party 20 years ago. But she never returned. For reasons we do not know, he decided right now to hire you to start looking for her and bring back her remains. Sounds fishy? Sure does. At least you get 200 gold pieces payment for the job, so why not go and look for that person?
The really interesting part is the promise of adventure a Sorcerer's Tower would bring. Sadly, it doesn't quite fulfill that promise, as we'll see. The adventure then has the players travel to the tower. The adventure simply states you can have 1 or 2 wilderness encounters. But since the adventure didn't even bother writing in thematic encounters that serve the story or overall narrative, you really shouldn't bother and just have the party arrive. Seeing as the estimated time for the adventure is already 4 to 6 hours, it's probably for the best anyway if you want this to still be a one-shot.
Yeah, you can of course add 1 wilderness encounter if you run this for new players just to get them used to combat rules, I guess. But otherwise I agree, those are unnecessary.
Now then, the dungeon. I find this dungeon to be incredibly bland. It promised a tower, but all you get is a 1-room ground floor, which makes little sense to me for a Sorcerer's Tower, with no map and an ogre that immediately attacks, and then down into the basement you go.
Considering that the wizard in question went to the tower 20 years ago, it makes sense that it's collapsed. But I guess the ogre could be handled differently. The interesting part, however, is the riddle the party needs to solve in order to continue. I personally think it's a bit too easy when you have the overall challenge rating of the adventure in mind, but at least there is something that can't be solved with a sword. The adventure, however, leaves it completely to the DM how to handle the riddle should they struggle. And next up would be a staircase that is of course trapped. Unfortunately, the trap is not designed to be avoided and has the only purpose to reduce the party's hit points. Not sure about you, but I really don't like that kind of design. Spotting and defusing a trap gives players a feeling of accomplishment.
The dungeon itself is very small, with very little exploration to offer, hiding a whole section behind a DC 20 check.
And then the area behind that is again trapped, with no way for the players to spot the disarmed. Same as on the stair traps, I dislike it. And this time at least, it's rewarded with a treasure chest full of useful loot. But since the DC in this entire sections are already pretty high for low-level characters and resources are draining fast, the entire section is not only optional, it makes the rest of the dungeon easier if you just leave it up.
The entire dungeon also doesn't feel very thematic. It doesn't feel like going through an evil sorcerer's dungeon. It feels like a bunch of rooms stitched together with very little rhyme or reason as to why any of it is here, let alone in the basement. As you enter the basement, you have to fight a bunch of spider swarms. Like the ogre, they will immediately attack if they spot you. This can be an interesting fight though, with the spiders crawling onto the players and then being very hard to hit.
Yeah, it's a fight where you actually have to think about the possible solutions and your tools, because just swinging your weapon is not very effective.
After this, you push onwards into a sitting area, which everyone has in their basement of course, with eyes everywhere, which not everyone has in the basement of course. Pushing on, you go into the Cabin of Curiosities, which is dusty because of dust methods, which, like the spiders, attack when they spot the players. Then after that, you go through a hall of mirrors depicting layers of the abyss, out of which 2 quasits spring, attacking the players when in range immediately. Can you spot the theme? Then onwards into the laboratory, which every sorcerer worth their worth has at the furthest point to the entrance.
And of course underground, because working with chemicals in an enclosed space with no ventilation has never caused any issues, right?
In here are the remains of the sorcerer, distilled in a bottle. He'll start throwing balls at the party in what can be quite an interesting boss battle, as the party has to find the correct flask to stop him, or survive all 9 flasks the sorcerer has at his disposal. After that, he's as helpless as an imp without a tail. The party finds some potions here as well as the titular wizard who is trapped in a bottle. If released, she can tell her tale of how she ended up here. Quote, they quickly figured out how to open the trapdoor to the underground level, but things went badly after that. Kifri Silverhill, a rogue, was stung to death by the swarm of spiders. Darren Flintmore, a halfling fighter, was dragged underwater and drowned by the water weird. Their cleric, Thoradin Dawnfist, was torn apart by the dust methods. Unable to retreat, Amelia pressed forward. Now why did they keep going after member died? Why was Amelia the wizard unable to retreat? Obviously, because not every loose end is tied up in the falling text, nor every possible reaction accounted for. Be ready to improvise and do so with confidence. After turning to the wizard to the employer, there's a second part of the adventure that is weirdly optional. The same night the party returns, they get a message from their employer. The wizard is in prison. Amelia is heartbroken finding out that her summer fling from 20 years ago is now married and tried to convince him to rekindle their relationship. Now she needs the party's help in finding a new hobby that doesn't involve trying to seduce a married man. That, as if the party's even invested in this wizard, the adventure doesn't give neat personalities to the NPCs like our adventures do. It also states they can just not and fade to black, adventure over. This section is also written so incredibly loosely, it might as well say, do what you want. You can try to get her a new boyfriend, then get her into religion, and then into a new adventuring party.
It sparks some ideas though. Amelia could join the party, for example, but most options involve second session and if you have a creative party. Depending if you go for a one-shot or not, this could be the opposite of your goal.
I will say the adventure can lend itself for being a hook for a possible campaign or further adventuring nicely. If the Sorcerer's Tower is expanded, it can have unlimited potential for what could be in there, and adopting the wizard into the party can make for a fun NPC in the future.
Yeah, so overall the adventure can work great if you want a challenge. The story unfortunately is not making much sense to me. The only reason for Ulfgar to wait 20 years before looking for the wizard is to have the specific roleplay moment when she realizes how long she was trapped in the bottle. The traps remove player agency and the dungeon itself does not feel very natural. And the loot is mostly useless for a one-shot or behind a mean trap. If you want to run this as a kicker for a campaign, however, there are more options. You could use it to introduce a player character, create some follow-up quests, or have the NPC as well-known contacts in Neverwinter for future events. Luke and I concluded to give this adventure a 12 out of 20. With a little work from your side, it can fit into any campaign, but as a one-shot, it's just not giving us enough. Thank you for watching and see you next time.
Good night.